Hello YouTube, Internet, world. Welcome back to another episode of Dime Store Cinema, on the road. Let's talk movies. Today I want to talk about the 2002 film, The Eye. It's a Chinese horror film. I saw it shortly after it was released in America. It was the later part of high school for me. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So the plot is, you know, as far as modern horror goes, it's fairly standard. A blind girl gets an eye transplant or cornea transplant. She starts seeing ghostly apparitions. She goes investigating, looking for the donor of the eye, and then she goes through a psychological and emotional journey trying to deal with her current situation. And it's a good film. I will say that my opinion of it has dropped slightly in the years since I originally saw it. But the reason I want to talk about it today, more so than the movie itself, although good, the main reason I want to talk about it is because it was the first Asian movie I had ever seen. And it really had a profound impact on my life. Because it opened up the door to foreign cinema in general. And foreign horror films in particular. So before I saw this movie, I didn't have much experience with horror films. I watched a lot of movies, but very few horror films. I watched, shortly before this, I watched Evil Dead, and then from there I watched A Nightmare on Elm Street, and then The Shining, and then Rosemary's Baby, and then The Exorcist, and then a whole slew of low-budget 80s campy horror films. So my experience with horror was varied, but it was very narrow. And I didn't even realize it. I didn't realize that China was actively making these types of movies, which led to my discovery of Japan making these types of movies, and then Korea making these types of movies. And it really opened up the passion in me to look for movies like this, which led me to discover some of my favorite films like Infection, like Reincarnation, like Old Boy, like Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, like Lady Vengeance, Ichi the Killer, and then much later on, awesome, ridiculous, low-budget Asian cinema like Tokyo Gore Police, and Machine Gun Girl, and yeah, stuff like that. So that's why this movie holds such an important and profound place in my heart, is the fact that it's influenced my pursuit of cinema so much. Now, I have no doubt that without seeing this movie, I would have eventually searched out those other films anyway, just from word of mouth and from research. But this movie came out before there were a lot of the resources that we have today as far as doing research on movies. It was 2002. So, I mean, the internet existed, but as far as, like, you know, the IMDb's and Rotten Tomatoes and blogs that exist today, there definitely weren't as many back then. So, discovering movies a lot of times was you going to the video store and looking through movies and finding just random stuff that turned out to be amazing. And that's exactly what happened with me. I found that movie randomly one day at a Blockbuster, and I mean, it essentially changed my life. If you want to be hyperbolic about it, but I mean, if you think about movies and stories in general, what you're doing is you're investing time into them, and time is your most valuable resource. So when you invest your time in something, you're affirming its importance, whether you're doing that actively or subconsciously. That's in fact what you are doing. So the countless hours that I have invested in movies based on my introduction to Asian cinema in this movie, it was absolutely profound. I mean, if you're not a film geek, then you hear stuff like that and you just think that I'm wasting my life. But like, I find stories to be very important for personal development. It's how you can assess yourself through the eyes of something or someone else. So it's a great tool for self-discovery and becoming self-aware, if you let it be. You don't have to. It can just be sheer entertainment, and there's nothing wrong with that. People need that. They need to be able to relax from time to time. But for someone like me, I can't watch a movie for just entertainment. Some more than others, but for me, it's always a thought experiment of some kind. So I look back and I look at myself and the effect that this movie has had on me, and it is a very important film to me. Now, I don't want you to think that just because I have this deep nostalgia for this movie that it's not good. It is actually a good movie. It's a very good horror film. I would say that my opinion of it has maybe dropped a little bit just in the wake of all of the other movies that I've seen that have been better. All the other, particularly Chinese and Japanese horror films that I've seen, and Korean films that I've seen that are just better than this one. I don't want that to take away from this one, though. It is still a good movie. There are just others that are better. But no other movie was my first to say. There's always that special place in your heart. For the same reason that Evil Dead has a very special place in my heart. It was really the first horror film that I actively pursued. I wanted to see Evil Dead. I went and I rented it because I wanted to see that movie. And that movie, Evil Dead, is almost single-handedly responsible for my fascination with the filmmaking process. I've always loved movies and I've always loved storytelling, but Evil Dead 2, or Evil Dead 1 rather, is the one that really sparked my interest in the behind the scenes. And there's a whole explanation for that, and I'm not going to go into that. I'm in the middle of writing a blog about that whole thing. So if you're interested in that, when that becomes available, you can read that. So yeah, that's what I really wanted to talk about with The Eye. It's a decent horror film, but for me, it's profoundly personal. There aren't many films that you can point at that really changed the course of your life. Once again, I'm being slightly hyperbolic, but I hold Wizard of Oz to that level because it was my family's first VHS. We watched it so much. I hold Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade up to that level because it's the first movie that I remember seeing in theaters. Still vividly remember the sunset scene, where the very end of the movie, where they're all riding off into the sunset. And that's been emblazoned in my brain, and I don't think I'll ever forget it, just how much of an impact that scene had on me. I was just a very young child and still remember it vividly. And then, of course, you have Evil Dead, which got me really interested in filmmaking itself. Now you have The Eye, which opened my eyes to foreign cinema, which has led to me watching such amazing films as like the Kurosawa films, Seven Samurai, which once again, I probably would have eventually seen those movies anyway, but like this expedited the process of me seeing good cinema. It's a big deal to me, because movies are a big deal to me. Movies have been a major part of my development. In fact, my accent has been influenced by movies, because where I come from originally, most people who come from that area have a fairly pronounced accent. I don't, because I learned inflection and speaking in general from movies instead of from my peers. And those are the little things that I don't think many people think about when they're thinking about movies. But then maybe other people haven't been impacted by movies like I have been, so maybe I'm speaking from a place of isolation here. But and I don't want you to think that my ideas about reality are shaped by movies, because that's not true. Because movies are themselves metaphors, and metaphors are intrinsically things that aren't true themselves, but help you discover truth. And that's how I see stories. That's why I like stories so much, because I believe they are a tool to be used to discover. This isn't much a review. I'm sorry. It's more just me pontificating about why I like movies and why I think they're important. But, I mean, to me, that's... If you're going to be a film critic of any kind, professional or just a novice like myself, I think you kind of have to hold movies to a regard that everyone else doesn't, or see them in a way that not everyone does. For the same reason, to be a food critic, you have to have a palate that understands layered flavors and what makes a dish good, as opposed to just being like, that's good. You have to understand what it is that is good and what it means to be good. So I don't want to continue on just going over and over again about this. I just, I think that this is a great movie for anyone who is interested in maybe discovering some a new genre. So if you're kind of tentatively interested in watching some Asian horror films, I think this is a good first one to watch. It's not too crazy, it's not too weird, it's just a fun ghost story, very competently made, very enjoyable. Because I mean, once you get kind of like start digging deep into the Asian cinema, you start discovering some really, really weird movies. I mean, particularly if you're talking Japanese horror films. Some of those movies are just trippy and weird. This one is a nice, easy story that I think it would be palatable to a lot of people if they're just trying to discover a new and interesting genre. So I think this is a great bridge into the genre. So I think I'm going to leave it there. The movie, of course, is The Eye. I recommend it. I think it's great. And when you watch it, you know, just keep in mind that this movie that you're watching right now has had a profound impact on my life. Whether or not you think that's sad or if you think that's cool, whatever. I just like talking about movies. So I will see you all next time.